We interrupt this record to bring you a special bulletin. The reports of a flying saucer hovering over the city have been confirmed.
Did you really go out with an alien? Uh-huh. What was it like? Real different.
Becoming Human, a Mork and Mindy podcast. Hello listeners, this is Paula Schaffner with episode 80, Pajama Game 2. The title is a reference to the 1954 musical, which was based on the 1953 novel 7.5 Cents, and this became a Doris Day movie in 1957, and the stage musical was revived in 1973 and in 2006, and apparently is a popular choice for community and school group productions. It is about a pajama factory. This episode, of course, has nothing to do with that. It's just a cute name for an episode about a pajama party. This episode first aired on January 7th, 1982, so they had, of course, skipped over Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. The IMDb synopsis is very short. Mearth has a sleepover. This was the 6th episode, directed by Bob Claver. We again have Cindy Beagle and Lisa Kite writing an episode that involves two of Mearth's classmates. There's a nighttime exterior of the house with snow on the ground. Mindy enters two plazas that includes chairs. She says she's home and takes off her coat. She's wearing a striped jacket, a ruffled white blouse, brown slacks, and brown shoes. Her hair is pinned up, and it's clear that she's just come home from work. Before the applause can fade out, Mork descends the stairs, and she hangs up her coat. In an upset voice, he says, "He's your son. You go up there and talk to him." He yells upstairs, "You're gonna get it now. Your mother's home. Don't make a face like that. It might freeze that way. And take that out of your mouth. You don't know where it's been." So he's doing a string of cliche things that a stay-at-home mother would say. So there's this continued gender role switch. Although Mork is daddy and Mindy is mommy, she still is closer to the traditional paternal role in this family. She asks, "Whatever happened to, hi little pooter, big kiss?" Bear that in mind because I will come back to this. But yes, she is referring to his nickname for her and one of his catchphrases that was used a lot in season 3. He says that she's thinking of herself and no one thinks about the poor little housemaker instead of homemaker or housewife.
Except for Richard Simmons. Size, go away. Send them all to Doris Day.
This is a fairly early imitation of Richard Simmons, who would become more and more famous throughout the 80s for his home exercise videos. And yes, the reference to Doris Day may be an intentional play on the title of the episode. Mindy asks what Mork is so hysterical about. And of course, hysterical has gendered associations, but about women being too emotional. He says, "Hysterical? Moi?" The usual thing of him referring to himself in French. He again calls Mearth her son and says that her son is upstairs doing things that would embarrass the Turkish police, which brings all kinds of horrific images to mind, and then it'll turn out that Mearth is just being mischievous and not any brattier than usual. Mork wants Mindy to go upstairs and beat some sense into Mearth. This had come up in the previous episode that Mindy was the disciplinarian. Now Mork wants her to not just talk to Mearth, but to hit him and possibly beat him. Mork moans in pain, sits on the couch, and says that his head hurts and he can hear snails crawl. So like all this tension has given him a terrible headache. She says she can't come home every day and be the villain. So she's starting to resent this role that she's perhaps originally taken on by choice, but now she feels it's being pushed onto her. She sits on the couch and says that Mork has to have some responsibility too, which ironically is what Mr. Good News, or whatever that name of that puppet was, saying that Mork needed to be a more responsible father. Mindy says when there's a disciplinary problem, Mork is going to have to learn how to handle it. And I think it's not just that she doesn't want to come home at the end of the day and deal with this, but some of these things need to be dealt with in the moment. He stands and more calmly says that he guesses she's right. He'll go talk some sense into Mearth. And then if Mearth doesn't listen, Mork will take him to a filling station and make him look at the men's room. I guess because men's rooms are filthy at gas stations. Mindy shakes her head but looks amused. Mork says if that doesn't work, hell, they could always buy him a pony and earn his soul for life. So that was interesting that he uses hell, and there is some mild swearing in this episode. This is getting back to the episode where Mork wanted to give Mearth a lot of presents and win his love that way. Mindy stands and says there's the problem. Mork can't bounce from one extreme to the other like that. He says tell that to Eldridge Cleaver. Cleaver was a Black Panther. He went through quite a few changes just by 1982. He became a born-again Christian. Then he was manufacturing codpiece revival virility pants he called the Cleavers. And then by the early 80s, he became disillusioned with what he saw as the commercial nature of evangelical Christianity and examined alternatives, including Sun Myun's campus ministry. Apparently by the 80s, he had become a conservative Republican. And in fact, a couple years after this episode aired, he ran for election to the Berkeley City Council, but lost. So yes, he did go from one extreme to another. Mindy takes Mork's hand and says they're both new at parenthood, which is an understatement. She says they can't fall apart every time Mearth misbehaves. The key to being a good parent is consistency. They sit again. She asks if he understands, and he says no. He also doesn't understand how they can make Haagen-Dazs ice cream in the Bronx. And then in a vaguely New York voice, he says, "Yo, you got small carob? I want some carob." I think Haagen-Dazs was fairly new at that time. I feel like I just started to hear about it in the 80s, at least new in America. She puts her hand on his arm and says they should go upstairs and act like two calm, responsible parents. They stand and take hands. As they head towards the stairs, there's a rumbling sound and then a clattering sound. Mindy can't believe that Mearth is bowling. Then there's rumbling and clattering again. 2 pins fall down the stairs. Mork says he can't believe it either. That's a really tough split. He bends down to pick up the pins. We go to Mearth's room, and we can see a stuffed animal of a giraffe that will return later. Mearth is in overalls as usual, and he's sitting at his drawing board, smiling. Mork and Mindy enter. Mork says son, but Mearth ignores him and says mommy 4 times, and he says he really missed her. He hugs her. Mindy calls him sweetheart, as she usually does, and says she missed him too. Mork looks resentful because he knows that Mearth is trying to play them off each other. After Mindy and Mearth let go, she says that Mearth's room is a mess. She asks why he was bowling in the house. I noticed in this episode in particular, it's been somewhat this way in the past, Mearth has a very wordy communication style. I guess it's supposed to be like a bright child who is trying to find his way to what he wants to say. So I've condensed this as much as I can. He says it happened to be league night and all the lanes were spoken for. She crosses her arms like that's not a good enough reason. Mork says, Mr. Smarty Pants, you have an answer for everything, don't you? Ha ha. How about this one? If the speed of light is 186,000 miles per second and the speed of a slug is an inch an hour, how long has Robert Conrad had that battery on his shoulder? So it starts out as a math puzzle, a word problem, and then it turns into a reference to the popular Robert Conrad ever-ready battery commercials of the late 70s. Mearth is now sitting again, and he looks puzzled. Mindy is annoyed, and she pulls Mork aside. She asks what he's talking about, and she says this is no time for brain teasers. She wants Mork to go over there and reason with his son. He says right mend, and she says consistency, so really trying to emphasize that.
I remember that. Don't worry. I've seen ordinary people twice. Saw Popeye once.
The movie Ordinary People came out on September 19th, 1980, so over a year before this would have been taped. It is about a family having difficult times and sort of a psychological drama. It was directed by Robert Redford and it starred Donald Sutherland, Mary Tyler Moore, Judd Hirsch, and Timothy Hutton. But of course the reason why I included this clip is because of the gratuitous but wonderful Popeye reference. I particularly liked how the audience reacted. You can see that Pam almost breaks. This does, I think, contradict what we got when Mork took the kids from his daycare to see Popeye, because I thought that he said that it was their second time going to see it. But I think by this point, Robin Williams was kind of embarrassed about Popeye. It was considered a flop. So I thought that was interesting that he threw in a bit of self-mockery, and I'm pretty sure that that was coming from him rather than from the writers. Mork calls Mearth son, and Mearth calls him dad. Mork tells Mearth that that's a nice shirt. Mindy scolds Mork. Mork tells her that he's just warming Mearth up. He says, son, the real guts of the matter is, how would you feel if you had any of your little friends over here and they saw this pigsty? Not a very diplomatic way to refer to the mess, but I thought it was an interesting take. Obviously, we'll see that it's not just a hypothetical question to Mearth, but he figured that peer pressure, that the other kids would not like this mess, although I don't think little kids generally care if their friend's room is messy. Mearth says that that's an easy question. This isn't West Point, and there's no white glove inspection. He says this is his lifestyle. But Mearth does latch on to Mork saying something about having some friends over. Mindy points out that is what Mork said. Mearth says, didn't he? So they seem to be teaming up at the moment. Mearth asks about having a sleepover. Mindy says if Mearth can prove to them that he's a responsible young man who takes a little pride in his possessions, then maybe we'll see. So she's not promising, but it's a possibility. Mork says, me too? Like he wants to have friends over. And she says, no. She tells Mearth to think about what they said, and he says he sure will. Mork and Mindy leave hand in hand, and she tells him that he handled that like a real father. So again, this is an episode where Mindy is reassuring Mork about his parenting style, although we'll find out that Mindy has some work to do on her own parenting style. She says that Mork did reason with Mearth. Mork says now he wants to talk to her about the bathroom downstairs, the pantyhose jungle. I guess he's pointing out that she's not that neat either. She leaves her pantyhose hanging in the bathroom, which used to be a thing. It would come up on Three's Company, for instance, but even in real life, I'm old enough that I've done this, that you rinse out your pantyhose and then just put them hanging from the shower rod. Of course, it's ironic because we usually see Mindy in slacks. Mearth slowly gets up and says he's got to clean this mess up so he can have some friends over. So he is going to pursue this.
Okay, here goes.
The special effects here are kind of simple. We see his excited arm movements, and this will come up a lot in this episode where he's just so happy. And I guess it's supposed to be kind of childlike. We don't get an exterior of the house, but the next scene is clearly set in the daytime, in fact, first thing in the morning, and there's some frost on the windows. Mindy is wearing her long white nightgown. I don't know if it's the one from the honeymoon, but I think it's interesting that Mork basically just has one sleep outfit, and she has at least three. She's holding on to part of the blanket. Mork has turned away from her, and he's hogging the rest of the covers. Mork wakes up, yawns, and says morning, little pooter, so he is still using that pet name. He asks if she slept well. She says, oh yeah, till about 3 when Mork took all the covers. He says, well, actually he took them around 1, but she didn't notice, and her little bones shaking helped him fall asleep. She says thank you, and it's a bit sarcastic, but they're actually both in a pretty good mood here. In this scene, I noticed her hair is really full and curly. Definitely the perm era.
Well, come here, I'll keep you warm. There we go. Oh, good morning. How we doing this morning? Baby Mearth, your model child is here. Baby Mearth just fixed you breakfast for you, lady.
Yeah, that's so nice. Now, I haven't had breakfast in bed since I had my tonsils out.
My note says cuddling interruptus because my shipper's heart went, oh, they're cuddling, and then boom, the kid comes along. They're not actually annoyed by Mearth entering without permission. I mean, at least he did knock. And maybe this is because he's been on his best behavior, as we'll discover, and he has brought them breakfast in bed. He does his little baby Mearth song, and the audience applauds. We find out that Mindy had her tonsils out. I don't remember if this came up before. I feel like there's always something on Gary Marshall shows about characters having their tonsils out. Mearth says a line about the banana being for the lady, but it's not said suggestively, thank goodness. She laughs, calls him sweetheart, and says no thank you. She doesn't want the banana. She says he's just been a little angel these last few days, so we know that some time has passed. He says he sure tried. He brings the tray over to her. He asks if he's out of line in thinking that perhaps a reward is due to him. Mork and Mindy look at each other, catching on, although Mork thinks this is a setup for the pony. Mearth, of course, is thinking of having his friends over. Mindy calls him sweetheart again and says that he can.
Are you kidding? Well then, come on down, kids. Now, Mommy and Daddy, allow me to introduce my classmates and schoolmates from Oregon. This is Selka, And this is Ovitz. Nano.
Boy, this is really Raznik.
Yeah, this is Earth, huh? And I thought Pluto was tacky. Yeah.
The impression I got from the previous episode is that beams run on a schedule like buses. I think that Mearth was already planning to have his friends come on that particular beam, although he at least pretended that he was asking for permission. And we get the special effects of the beam again. Even though we, the audience, and Mork and Mindy met Zelka and Ovitz in the previous episode, I guess they weren't formally introduced, so that's what Mearth does here. Zelka thinks that Earth is Raznik, which I guess is sort of like cosmic and rad, but Ovitz thinks that it's tackier than Pluto, continuing what their personalities were in the earlier episode. And we see that Mork and Mindy have even less privacy in their bedroom than they thought when Mearth came in with the breakfast in bed. There's a sunny daytime exterior with snow on the ground. Mindy in voiceover says, "Those kids are amazing." And then we go into the house, and she says, "They turned their backs for a second, and the kids cloned the phone." And we see Mork and Mindy in the kitchen with over a dozen apparently identical beige push-button phones. Now Mindy has her hair held back, I think with barrettes. She's in a buttoned shirt that's a darker beige than the phones and gray slacks. Mork is in one of his usual outfits with a multicolored shirt. He tells her to look on the bright side. If they ever do a telethon, they're prepared. Telethons used to be a bigger thing back then for fundraising. It's not explained how the kids cloned the phones. One of the phones rings. They answer just about all of them until Mork finds the right one. He says into the phone, "Yes, we have Prince Albert in a can, and we already let him out." And then he laughs. After he hangs up, he says, "You're not going to get me twice in one day." She laughs. Apparently somebody is prank calling him with an extremely dated prank call. I mean, I think this was one of these things as a kid in the 70s and a teen in the 80s I heard of. Prince Albert didn't yet have its piercing association. And you call a store and ask, "Hey, do you have Prince Albert in a can? Well, you better let him out," etc. And I think the tobacco was named after Queen Victoria's husband. Anyway, you still can kind of get the joke, but it does feel odd in many ways, including that we just don't get prank calls as such anymore. It's more like spam to a cell phone. There's an explosion, and she wonders what it is. He says it sounded like a loud noise. The three kids come downstairs. Mearth is holding the now headless giraffe. Ovitz zapped George's head. Zilka looks sympathetic, and Ovitz looks amused. In the previous episode, we had the thing where he claimed that he was Mearth's friend, but he was not a nice guy, and so I wonder, well, is he a frenemy? Apparently, Mearth considered him a good enough friend to invite over, at least for a few hours. Mork asks where George's head is now. Mearth says it's somewhere over Denver, so I don't know if it shot out of the attic roof or what happened there. Definitely by the end of this episode, they were going to have to do some home repairs. Mindy looks shocked. Zilka 3 times calls Ovitz mean, so he 3 times thanks her, proud of being mean. Mearth tries to tell Ovitz off, but Ovitz interrupts and says, "Shut up, you wimp." I don't know if I talked about the word wimp on this show before. It started to gain in popularity in the late 70s, definitely was big in the 80s. Don't hear it as much nowadays. It was an insult to men, usually saying that they were weak and cowardly. Mindy calls a timeout. She says she thought orphans were supposed to be nonviolent. And of course we saw that the 2 boys were sparring in the previous episode in the classroom. She manages to get the 2 boys to make up by threatening that they'll have to spend the rest of the day in the corner. Ovitz apologizes for blowing George's head off. He says he himself was probably just suffering from beam lag, like jet lag, and then he bark laughs. Zilka smiles, so even though she's on Mearth's side, she's pretty trusting. Mearth tells Ovitz he's hateful, mean, nasty, but fair, so I guess that's his concession. Ovitz looks surprised, and Zilka looks delighted.
Yeah, that's good. Now shake. That's better.
I think that they've done the shaking your whole body for shake on this episode before. I know that they did it on Laverne and Shirley. The odd thing is, though, that there were some perfectly Earth-like handshakes in the previous episode. There's the sound of the beam, and Mindy says it's too bad. It's time for the 2 kids to go home. Ovitz and Zilka run over to the landing by the front door, and Zilka grabs her bag. Ovid says, "Goodbye, Mr. and Mrs. McConnell. It has been a lovely visit. You have a lovely home." And he sounds like he's reciting something. We don't know what the home life is for Orkins. We know they're made in test tubes, but I don't remember how they're raised. It's possible Miss Giesba taught them how to be polite. Mindy says goodbye, and Mork in a southern accent says, "Y'all come back now, you hear?" They exchange nanu-nanus. The beam takes Ovitz, but not Zelka. Mindy comes closer and tells Zelka that she missed the beam. Zelka says no, she didn't. Mearth invited her to sleep over. And there's a cut to Mearth making sort of a, "why yes I did" face. It doesn't explain why Zelka took her bag off the coat hook and made it seem like she was going to leave. Zelka beckons Mearth over because she wants to hear that new Olivia Newton-John record again. Mindy guesses that she means "let's get physical." Zelka says it makes her crazy, and she trembles happily. Mearth grins and follows Zelka upstairs. Olivia Newton-John's song "Let's Get Physical" was released on September 28th, 1981, so probably not long before this episode was recorded. Not only the lyrics, but the video, which was one of the earliest music videos, were suggestive. The idea that this little girl wants to listen to it makes Mindy worried. Mindy goes to Mork and grabs his wrist. She says Zelka can't spend the night. Can she? Mork reminds her that they gave their permission and they need to be consistent. He thinks Zelka and Mearth are innocent. They're just kids. Mindy guesses he's right. This aging reverse thing, instead of reverse aging as I usually call it, is just hard to get the hang of. Which is understandable, because she has this child who is maybe 3 months old. He's sort of like a kindergartner, but he's got the body of a man in late middle age, and his little school friend is over, and she is about the same age as Mearth, but she is very curvaceous and she wears low-cut outfits. Mindy says she keeps forgetting that in the kids' minds, they're just babies, even though their bodies are anatomically correct. She picks up Mearth's jacket. Mork says Mearth is just into snakes and snails and puppy dog tails, so the old rhyme of what little boys are made of. Mindy sees a magazine fall out of Mearth's jacket, although this isn't actually clear the way it's shown. You kind of have to put it together later. The magazine is called Bronco, and she opens it to a centerfold of a woman who seems to be in a red bikini top or bra. This flies by really quickly, but if you pause it, you can see a little bit more. The woman's hip is naked, but she's got a pink towel in front of her. Nothing is actually revealed. Mork says, "Cowabunga, Buffalo Bob," so reference to the old Howdy Doody show. He takes the magazine and says the woman is sitting on a tractor, although it didn't look like that to me, and I wondered if that was a Robin Williams ad-lib. Mindy says they never know what Mearth is going to do next. He's just growing up so fast, which is an understatement. She says when boys start reading magazines like this, it's time for their fathers to sit down with them and have a little talk with them about the difference between boys and girls. Mork says they already worked that out. He told Mearth that boys like to play sports and girls like to wear makeup, and if you're Alice Cooper, you can do both. It's a very stereotypical view of men and women, boys and girls. I think the second referenced Alice Cooper, and so he's sort of seen as a gender bender compared to that. I felt like this was another episode setting things back from where we started, where Mork and the other Orkins were very gender fluid, and here there are boys and girls, men and women, and they must be separated or terrible things will happen. Mindy says we need to have a little talk, and by that she means the three of them, because she says after Zelka goes home, they'll sit down and have a discussion about the birds and the bees. Mork says all right, but he still thinks that Mearth is too young for that. And it's interesting that when Mork wanted to tell Mearth that he was half Orkin, Mindy was the one who felt that Mearth wasn't old enough. Mearth comes a little way downstairs and asks Mommy if it would be out of line for him to borrow a stethoscope. She doesn't have one. He says then he'll have to use his ear, and so we're supposed to imagine Mearth putting his head to Zelka's very full chest. Mork proudly says, "My son, the doctor." So he's not worried about the kids fooling around or playing doctor. And of course this is a contrast to the previous episode where he told Orson Mearth doesn't have to go to OrkMed. He doesn't have to be a doctor or a lawyer or a jewelry salesman, whatever makes him happy. Mindy says they'll have to keep their eyes on those kids all night long. long. Mork says they can't go upstairs until they scrub up first, like he actually thinks that Mearth is becoming a doctor, and he even says that Mearth might be in surgery. Mindy looks confused and then annoyed. Mork holds his arms up like he just scrubbed up as he goes upstairs, so similar to the episode where the egg hatched. There's a nighttime exterior of the house with snow on the ground. The furniture has been cleared out of the living room, so now there's an orange pup tent on the rug. Mork is in his usual red and white sleepwear. This time Mindy is in her striped pajamas. Mearth is in blue pajamas, and he's got fuzzy slippers like Mork, and he's got a plaid robe. Zilka is wearing low-cut red footy pajamas. She's sitting on a rolled-up sleeping bag with another bag behind her. Mork is sitting on an ice chest, and I think Mindy is too, but I couldn't tell what Mearth was sitting on. Mindy and Zilka are roasting marshmallows on the sterno. Mindy says, "Isn't this fun? Camping out in the living room all together." Mork says you get the best of both worlds, the great outdoor feeling and the great indoor carpet. Mearth, who's been resting his face on his hand, looks annoyed and asks, "What's happening here?" Zilka shakes her head, but like in agreement, like she's just confused, shaking her head. Mearth says all he wanted to do was take a hot bath with Zelda. She beams as if that would have been fun. And suddenly they're the Wilderness Family. He rests his face in his hand again. The Adventures of the Wilderness Family, also known as the Wilderness Family, came out in 1975 as a very wholesome movie about a family moving out to the wilderness. And yes, I saw it as a kid. I don't know how Mearth would have heard of it, but maybe by then it had shown up on TV. Mork says, "Come on, kids. Where's your pioneer spirit? Come on. We're sitting around the old sterno. We can swap stories and make stew. Or we can swap stew and make stories. Or we can all get stewed." The kids look at each other in confusion, possibly because they don't know that getting stewed means to get drunk, or maybe they would be confused if they did know that. Mindy asks if anybody has a good story to tell. She herself has a great story about the first time she baked raisin loaf. Mork says that's a classic, and he bark laughs. I thought that was kind of cute. It's not a very shippy episode, and I'll talk about that, but you do get a sense here of them having shared stories with each other as a couple, and that they enjoy that. Zilka tells Mearth specifically that she's got a story.
I was at the Orc farm milking a fring, and this traveling salesman came along and asked me if I wanted to see what was in his sample case.
Would anyone like a soft drink?
No, thank you. So I said no, and he went away, and I never saw him again. The end.
Oh, that's great, Zilka. That's more plot than Kurt Vonnegut ever used.
Just like when Zilka wanted to do show and tell specifically with Mearth, he is her main audience, and her story starts out on an orc farm where she was milking a fring. Don't know if that's more like a cow or a goat or what that might be. And then a traveling salesman came along, so then we're thinking, the dirty jokes about traveling salesmen and farmers' daughters. But it's actually an innocent story, and a rather pointless one. Nonetheless, Mindy is worried, and Mork makes a remark about Kurt Vonnegut's writing style, so another of the literary jokes that seem to be coming up this season. Mindy thinks this is the perfect time for her raisin loaf story. Mork says not yet, she doesn't want to peek too soon. He bark laughs again, and tells the kids that it'll slay them. Mork says that they'll pretend that they're not even in the living room, but use their imaginations and go to the deepest, darkest jungle. This could have been charming, that Mork is encouraging kids' imagination. We've seen how good he is with Earth children, but what we get is a 3-minute sequence that's both racist and tedious. It starts out with just Mork, and then he pulls Mearth into it after about half a minute. And Mearth is the great white hunter, well, the reasonable white hunter, and Mork is his gun bearer, P.ba, although he changes his name, and Jonathan Winters teases Robin about that. Jonathan Winters, of course, does his posh British accent, as he has had with similar characters on the show and elsewhere. And Mork does kind of a combination between what would have been modern jive of the time and Rochester from the Jack Benny Show. Now, I think Eddie Anderson did a great job with the role of Rochester, giving in a lot more than what you would expect from a stereotypical servant role. The problem is Robin Williams is not Eddie Anderson. He is a white man from a privileged background, and yes, there have been some questionable moments before, but this goes on so long and is not funny. It was painful, although we can clearly see that Robin is having the time of his life. He loves riffing with Jonathan. And Mindy or Pam looks very amused when they cut to her. But Zilka, like me, looks dubious. I should point out that in an episode where Mearth doesn't know the facts of life, he somehow knows about pregnant baboons. And there's various references, but I'll just mention Marlon Perkins, who I think has come up before. And he was the host of Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom documentary TV program that aired from 1963 to 88 and featured a lot of wildlife footage. There's another sunny daytime exterior with snow on the ground, so we know that the night is over and it's morning. Mork is in the blue sleeping bag. The patchwork-looking sleeping bag is empty. Mindy emerges from the pup tent. She says morning. Mork wakes up and says, this is the life. No noise, no smog, no Underoil commercials. And of course, I recently included an Underoil commercial in one of my podcasts. He's acting like they really have gotten away from the city out into the wilderness. She notices that there's also no kids.
Where's Murph and Zelka?
Let's
Get
physical.
physical. Let's get physical.
Our bodies count.
The kids aren't exactly on tune, and they don't seem to know much of the lyrics, but you get the idea. Mork tells Mindy that Mearth is her son and wishes her good luck. So again, the thing of when the kid misbehaves, he's your son. She asks what the kids were doing up there. Zelka says they were sleeping. They couldn't sleep in the living room because there was so much noise, even though Mork just said it wasn't noisy. Mearth agrees and tells Mommy that even though she has a little bump of a nose, she snores loud. I think we've had a thing with Mindy snoring before. And again, what is this thing about Pam Dauber's nose? I mean, Morgan Fairchild, for instance, had a much smaller nose. It's just an ordinary nose. And Mindy looks embarrassed. Zilka thanks Mearth for not letting her sleep alone. Mindy looks worried. Mork tells Mindy that maybe Mearth was just being a good host. There's the sound of the beam, so Mindy tells Zilka that she has to go home now. Zilka thanks Mr. and Mrs. McConnell for letting her stay over, and she sounds a lot more sincere than Ovitz, of course. She tells them that they have a great son, and she enjoyed him very much. Mearth does his excited arm movements. Mearth twice says he's going to miss Zelka, but he'll see her back in school. And if you recall, they only go to school once a month Earth time. He's still doing the excited arm swings. Next time he'll get a chance to sleep over at her house. And again, I don't know what the living situation is. She says nanu nanu, and the beam takes the front door and then her. Mearth shakes himself a little and tells Mommy and Daddy that they really got to work out the kinks on that beam, and as you may recall, last time it took the sofa. Mindy goes to Mearth and puts an arm on his shoulder. She tells Mork that they've postponed having this little talk long enough. Mork says she's right, and he's in the batter's box right now. So a sports reference. They all go over to the dining table and sit down. Mork says that's another nice shirt Mearth has there. And I guess at this point Mearth can dress himself. Mindy says strike one. The batter missed the ball. Didn't say what he needs to say. Mork thinks she's calling these a little close, like she's the umpire. Mork tells his son that in this world there are two types of people. Let's just say male and female. Mearth asks which is which. Mork says you find that out on the street. So even though he's trying to give a facts of life lecture, he's kind of passing it on. Then he says these male and female fall in love and they register at Bloomingdale's. So they get engaged and they register to get wedding gifts. Then they get married, and then they try to marry off all their other single friends. Mearth likes the raisin loaf story better, so I guess Mindy did get to tell it at some point. Mindy thinks Mork left something out. So Mork says, sometimes they don't register, they just ask for the cash. Through clenched teeth, Mindy says she meant the part about how babies get to be babies. I think she's saying conception, but everything is so euphemized here. Then Mork says through clenched teeth that he doesn't think Mearth is interested in that right now. Then Mearth speaks through clenched teeth and he says he is interested in that. Mork tries to tell him, but he can't, so he has to do a mind probe. He puts his forehead against Mearth's forehead, and there's a buzzing, and then after a few seconds, he says that that's how babies are made. I'll just point out, Mork didn't really understand the mechanics of sex until his wedding night, and there's an implication that they don't have sex as such on Orc. They're not real consistent about that. I'm not sure what he actually told Mearth. This is a weird thing to talk about, but would this even have come up on Orc? Because yes, the children are physically mature, but they wouldn't be fooling around anyway because that's not an Orcan thing to do. It's a very strange episode. The implications are a bit disturbing. Mearth is surprised by this information, and he wonders what it's got to do with him. Mindy mentions that Zelka said that you didn't sleep alone. I think she means she, but my subtitles said you. Maybe my notes are wrong. Mearth tells her that he gave Zelka his teddy bear, so she slept with Teddy upstairs. Mearth slept downstairs in his parents' bed. So when they came downstairs, Mindy asked what they were doing, and they said sleeping, but they weren't sleeping, or at least Mearth wasn't sleeping because he had to wake up to go upstairs. But yes, we've seen his teddy bear on at least 2 episodes so far, so kind of become a thing, unlike the poor giraffe. Mearth tells Mork that the time will come when he'll understand Mork's story. He stands and says it's time for him to go. Mork and Mindy also stand and follow him. Mindy asks Mearth if he didn't understand Mork's story, why was that funny magazine in Mearth's pocket? So she's not going to call it a dirty magazine, it's a funny magazine. Then Mearth says that it was in Mr. Bickley's garbage, and I was so surprised because it has been several episodes since Mr. Bickley just disappeared. There's been no reference to him. Apparently he still lives in the building and puts out his garbage, including old dirty magazines, although they did say earlier that this was Miss January, so can't be that old. Mearth was going to make paper airplanes out of it, but he thought better of it and he dismissed it. He says he's going to make the beds real good because next time around he wants to stay over at Zelka's. I guess they feel they can't say no because that would be inconsistent and the kids are innocent, and so it should be fine. After Mearth leaves, Mindy says she and Mork jumped to conclusions. I don't know that Mork jumped to conclusions. It seemed like it was coming more from Mindy. And she mentions that Zelka slept with Mork's teddy and seems amused by that. Mork says the hard part now is he's going to have to go tell a teddy bear the facts of life. And Mindy looks stunned. She's not taking this as a joke. It's like he's serious. He's going to go up there and talk to Bonzo or whatever they're calling the teddy these days and tell him that they're male and female and all that. There's another nighttime exterior with snow on the ground. Mork summons Orson, and he calls him Cellulite Central. Orson says Mork is just in time to play some rack-orc ball. So it's like racquetball, but with orc in the middle. He beams a silver headband onto Mork and gives him a huge racket. Orson says he needs to practice because he's playing in a celebrity tournament on the planet Fuca. And that's how it's pronounced, although the subtitles spell it as F-U-C-A, so kind of getting that past the censor. I guess Orson is a celebrity on Orc. I mean, I assumed he was pretty powerful, but didn't know how famous. Mork wants to do his report. Orson says that Mork can give his report while they play. So they start playing, although we just hear the ball, we don't actually see it. Mork says his report is on parenthood. Orson says, again, I could use a little variety. Like me, he's getting kind of tired of Mork reporting on the same things over and over. He says lately all Mork seems to talk about is his son. Mork says it's a tough job keeping the children of today from becoming the children of tomorrow. And I didn't know what that meant. Maybe they don't grow up, you don't raise them right. Then they disagree on whether Mork's last serve was in or out. Then there's Thunder. We've seen what Orson can do with Thunder. So Mork says, who am I to question one of your judgments? But he mutters that Orson would never get away with this at Wimbledon, so like tennis rather than racquetball. And the scene ends there. No actual report. This was an odd episode to watch now, but it was actually odd to watch in 1982 for obvious reasons. As you can see, Maureen Arthur and Harvey Lembeck come back, although Harvey isn't in it much. We get a little bit more of him being a frenemy to Mearth. Lembeck actually died 2 days before this aired at the age of 58. That probably made it even stranger at the time. So yes, we get Maureen Arthur back. And again, I think she does fine with this role that is kind of uncomfortable to watch. As I said before, she does it very sincerely. She is very animated. It's fine if this is what you want. As I was watching this episode, I thought, well, maybe I have just been too hard on this episode. There's potential here. Yes, we are again hearing more about Mork and Mindy learning about parenthood, but there were some interesting twists on that. It would have been interesting to see more of them trying to find that balance with each other, just within themselves, how they interact with Mearth, who is also learning and changing. Of course, this episode is about the sleepover. We could have more of the 3 kids playing together, but it's really just to get Zelka's foot in the door. Mindy thinks the kids are coming over for the day, and then Mearth, without really asking for permission, has promised Zelka that she could stay over, and so they haven't discussed that as a family, and then it raises all these issues about, is our baby going through puberty? Weirdness of it all. I rate each of these episodes on a 0 to 4 egg scale, which measures how much it delivers what I'm looking for in the series. This isn't what I signed on for, but it wasn't bad. I was leaning towards a 2.5, but we did get that tedious and racist 3-minute long scene that just really ground things to a halt, and so I had to drop down to 2.25 eggs. Definitely not the worst episode of the series, but probably skippable unless you're just really curious. I also rate each of these episodes on a 0 to 4 heart scale, which measures how well it supports and promotes the romantic relationship of Mork and Mindy. It just isn't that shippy. It's another one where it's more of a focus on them as parents, and even when it looks like we might be getting some couple time, it's just seconds and it's snatched away. But they are trying to support each other. Although they have disagreements, it wasn't an episode where they were fighting all through it. They were trying to work things out. There is a lot of them mildly touching. Second episode in a row, I'm going to go with 1 heart out of 4. This is, of course, the last we'll see of Ovitz for understandable reasons, but it's also the last we see of Zelka. And I don't know if there are even any references to Mearth being in school again, but we'll see as we go along. We're now halfway through the last season. There will be some switches, not as dramatic as what we got in season 2, if I recall correctly, but there will be some new directions. Definitely Mearth will continue to be a huge part of this. During season 3, I said that Glenda Faye was my least favorite Mork and Mindy character, but I do feel that on this rewatch, Mearth is pretty low on the list himself, and we do see much more of him than we saw of Glenda Faye. I don't hate every moment he's there. There are a few things that I kind of smiled at, but I just feel like his presence has not been good for the show or for Mork and Mindy as a couple, but he's not totally tanking things. There's still some things that I liked. 2.25 eggs, 1 heart. This is Paula Schaffner with Pajama Game II. Let's get physical.
This is a pajama party? Gonna get together tonight. Tell everybody that the time is right. Just after 8 we'll congregate. Pajama party tonight. Gonna get together and dance all night. And do some talking while the moon is bright. So get your date and don't be late. Pajama party tonight. Oh, what a party.